Hi, everybody. This is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com, where truth matters. So I am going to review a debate between a Catholic called William Albrecht and a Baptist called Alton Johnson, and it's on the Marian Dogmas. And before I do that, I want to wish you a very happy Epiphany. I'm filming this on the date of the Epiphany, the time when the Magi brought their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh to honor the birth of Jesus to the birth parents, Mary and the legal dad, Joseph. And so it's a wonderful day. After I finish doing this, I'm going to be taking down the last of my Christmas decorations because it is the last day of the 12 days of Christmas. And so I'm going to be doing that. But here we go. So in this debate, I can say I was very impressed by the level of friendliness between these two. They were both very professional. Neither of them got really upset. Neither of them raised their voice in any way. They had a very good approach, very good demeanor. And I'm a person who was born and raised a Catholic, but I didn't really understand the Catholic faith too well. I never really looked into it. Then I was married in the Lutheran church. My husband is still Lutheran. Then I discovered the Baptist church. So I spent around 10 years as a Baptist. And then after a lot of study, came back to Catholicism. And I feel like weak Catholics become Protestants and strong Protestants become Catholics. I think somebody else has said that before. But because I have these different perspectives, I want to try to offer both sides and try to be as fair and equal as I can in representing both sides here, because I do understand the Protestant perspective and the arguments. And in fact, one of the reasons I came back to Catholicism was because of some Protestants' interpretation of Revelation 12, which I think makes it very clear that Mary was the Queen of Heaven. But I digress. Let's listen to a few of these clips. Now, I've got some timestamps here where I think they talked about some pretty interesting stuff. And so we're going to listen to the timestamps, and then I'll offer some commentary. Feel free to make comments here on what you think. And here we go.
My thing crashed. I had no idea what you were saying. Can you go back to that? You were saying.
Yeah.
I apologize.
No, it's okay. Well, basically, I'll just try to sum it up. Is that I don't see where there is an explicit writing or explicit support of these particular dogmas from the people that were closest to Mary and closest to the events that was happening around Christ's life, death, and burial and resurrection.
So before he goes into that, let me just mention what the dogmas are. So one of them is Mary is the mother of God. So it goes like this. Mary is the mother of Jesus. Jesus is God. Therefore, Mary is the mother of God. She was immaculately conceived, free from the stain of original sin. She is a perpetual virgin. She took a vow of virginity, and she was assumed into heaven, body and soul, at the end of her life. Those are the dogmas. But the one they're going to focus on the most is the perpetual virginity. So let's go.
Let's stick with one. Let's stick with the perpetual virginity.
Correct.
The perpetual virginity, I would argue, is scriptural. I think we have the roots of it there in Mary's uttering of the words that she knows not man. How can this be since I know not man? She repeats through St. Luke the Hebrew idiom found in Judges chapter 11, where the exact idiom is uttered by Jephthah's daughter, who utters those words to indicate she is going to end her life as a perpetual virgin. This is very likely why the earliest of fathers viewed Mary as having been a vowed virgin. It's very early on. We've got fathers that noticed the tie between Holy Mary and Jephthah's daughter. By the way, Google's not going to be your friend. You're not going to find anything other than our articles on Jephthah's daughter and Mary. But aside from that, Alton.
Let me just comment. I think that that's a very good point that he just made as far as the very earliest citations of Mary. Mary said, how can this be? I also want to bring up two other people who said, how can it be? So Zechariah, when the angel Gabriel approached him saying that Elizabeth was going to get pregnant, said the same thing, basically. How can it be? But he said it knowing that he could obviously have intercourse with Elizabeth, but that Elizabeth was very old. Harken back to Abraham and Sarah. How can this be? Because Sarah was very old. So they all know the method of getting pregnant and how it can be. So the fact that Mary said that only shows that she definitely took a vow of perpetual virginity. I would actually push back as hard as I can on Alton to really think about that, because when I was a Protestant, I used to think about this vow, and I never really looked into when she said, how can this be? Because clearly she was a young woman. She was betrothed to Joseph, and it's pretty clear how it could be. But I also want to add one other thing that's scriptural that I think is really important, that I think that they could have touched on a little bit more. And that was when Jesus was on the cross and he gave the rights to John, his apostle, to watch Mary, to take care of Mary, his mother, he would not be able to do it under a Jewish law called Kibbud Av V'im, which is a Jewish law that says the blood brothers and sisters would have to have taken care of the parents. So you have to take care of your parents by law. So if Jesus had these brothers, James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon, he would have to assign one of them or the sisters the right to take care of his mom before going outside of the immediate family, if he had an immediate family. I think that is extremely strong. Jesus is not going to break one of the laws that he established in the Old Testament just because his preference for John. Now, as a Protestant, what I used to think about that is I thought, well, he must have thought, he must have known that John would live a longer life. He would outlive James. He would outlive some of these other people. Of course, James the Just, as Josephus attested, was martyred around 64 or so. And so that was one argument that I thought in my head. But that actually was outweighed when I considered all of the brothers, all of the sisters that he supposedly had, and the fact that he would break a law to give it to somebody outside of the immediate family. But I digress. Here we go. Let's listen to some more.
Earlier, I think yesterday, somebody showed me a screenshot of yours where you said that the belief in the perpetual virginity was, I think, 3rd or 4th century. It's before that. So we can find this belief very early on. So what I would do is I would push back and I'd say, well, look, Alton, there's a very clear reason why the reformers were unanimous on the perpetual virginity, to the point where the reformers, the reformed churches, would call those that deny it basically Helvetians, heretics. Because the earliest church from the earliest of times, I'm talking about the 100s and onward, and we can trace the lineage of each of these fathers to an apostle, they believed and they held to this. You're not going to find a single early church father denying Mary's perpetual virginity. That to me is the most powerful evidence of it. If you can find it, even if we say we find it in seed form only in the Bible, we don't need it to be explicit in the Bible. We find it in seed form, and then we find it expounded upon in the early fathers and in an unbroken lineage, to the point where when the first person arises that denies it, he's condemned. And then you go through church history and you arrive at the time of Luther, and Luther viewed it as an insult to even claim he denied it. Calvin accused those that denied it of being pretty much Helvetians, which were heretics. And I can go on and on. This was, and as you know very well, Alton, my concern here is you claim you are Reformed, but the rallying cry of the Reformation, I'm sure you know it. One of them was sola scriptura, sola gratia, sola fide, sola scriptura, scripture alone. And I've heard the arguments people bring forth, well, this is why they would have believed it. I don't think that they're good arguments, because these reformers are trying to so-called sanitize Christianity of heresies that they believed had crept in. Well, clearly the perpetual virginity was not one that they needed to so-called sanitize. They believed it to be apostolic. So I really think that that is a very powerful testimony when you look at the fact that every apostolic church holds to that today. Not just them, Alton. You got the Lutherans that hold to today. You got the Anglicans that hold to today. It's if anything, it's a minority position to deny this. And I think the difficulty for your position is that it begins to be denied when we've got liberal academics that come into the field. You don't have it denied by any Orthodox people beforehand. And when I say Orthodox, I mean Tainio.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to cut you off.
Ahead, brother.
Okay, so when is the first time, or what source do you have that is the earliest that speaks of the perpetual virginity of Mary?
Proto-Evangelium, James, mid-100s.
Okay, so that was the mid-100s. Do you have anybody earlier than that?
No, there's very few writings that are earlier than that in terms of the apostolic fathers.
That we have. I want to add it. This was one thing last night that I was a little bit concerned about, is the focus on the Proto-Evangelium of James. I don't think that book, and William has actually admitted this, I don't think that book is the best one to use. It does explicitly talk about the perpetual virginity and how Mary's an ever virgin. However, the reason I don't think it's a perfect book is because it's claimed to be written by probably James the Just, who had died back around 64. We just mentioned that. And the problem with that is this book people have claimed is written around 150. And so that's a bit of a problem to me, because right off the bat, the author is in question. The next point, I mean, you have the Gospel of Mark, for example. Mark named himself. He didn't, even though it was a lot of it was Peter's gospel. That was one thing that was problematic to me. The other thing about the Proto-Evangelium of James is it goes against what some of the church fathers believed. Now, some church fathers believe that Jesus had brothers from Joseph's prior marriage, but other church fathers, and that mainly comes from the East, but other church fathers believe that Jesus did not have brothers, but cousins. And that tends to be the belief, I believe, that William has, that Jesus had these cousins. And that is in alignment with what Jerome said. So Jerome was one of the reasons why I came back to Catholicism, because he wrote a book called Events Against Helvidius, where he explicitly named 4 early church fathers who were martyred, who also affirmed the perpetual virginity of Mary. He named St. Ignatius of Antioch, who was born somewhere around 35, and he died around 107, 108. He was martyred. St. Polycarp also was martyred. Both of those were disciples of John, and John, of course, was taking care of Mother Mary. He would have known about Mother Mary. We also have, he named St. Irenaeus, who was writing his book on Against Heresies in 180, and Justin Martyr. All of these people were martyred. St. Justin Martyr was martyred. His last name that we use in history affirms that. But the reason I'm naming those is because they were around before the Proto-Evangelium of James. They were living before, maybe with the exception of Irenaeus. I don't know exactly when he was born. And if we date the Proto-Evangelium of James to around 150. And so I would have named those 4, but I would have even really emphasized, because Alton is sola scriptura, I would have kept going back to what's in the Bible, in the books that he affirms, and talking about the what we see with the actual, what Mary said. I would hit him on that a little bit harder. And also what Jesus said to John, behold your mother, and then behold your son. Those are really important. And so let me just go over to the chat and see if there's some comments here. So yeah, Urshman says, yeah, it's a tough topic. As far as I know, the Orthodox position is correct. I was baptized Catholic, but the Pope, etc., makes it impossible for me to stay with Roman Catholicism. Yeah, so we have, that's the thing. That's what I've noticed. I've been on YouTube for a while, noticing that there is a lot of people on YouTube who were raised Catholic as I was, and then left the faith. And some of them stayed outside of the faith, and some went to Protestantism like I did, and others went to the Orthodox faith. As you know, the Greek Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church had a schism in 1054, which is a real shame. St. Ignatius of Antioch actually talked against schisms, named the Catholic Church, and talked about the importance of staying in unity. He said that throughout his 7 epistles that he wrote, but I digress. I'm getting a little bit outside of that. But I can see that the Orthodox faith isn't very different from the Catholic faith with respect to Mary. In fact, I have a friend who's Orthodox, and he said when he married a Catholic woman, the Catholic priests, when they found out that he was Orthodox, they were like, oh, sigh of relief, because it wasn't as much different as some of the other belief systems. So anyway, so that was the deal. So here we go. Let's listen here to more on this.
And in terms of the apostolic fathers before that, they're dealing with many other issues. They're not laying out much dogmatic issues on many issues. So
I do want to admit something, though. When I go back and I read Ignatius and Polycarp and Justin Martyr and Irenaeus, they do reference the Virgin. They talk about the Virgin, and they reference her virginity in their writings. However, as from a Protestant perspective, I might argue, had Jerome not said this, I might argue that, wait a second, we all agree that she was a virgin when she was giving birth to Jesus. We all agree to her virginity at that point. And so as a Protestant, I would think that. And I would also use the Protestant argument that Alton said when he said she was a virgin until they didn't consummate the marriage until he said that. And I remember that being my argument for a while. But then I read Trent Horn's book on Catholicism. It was actually one of the books that was pretty stellar in bringing me back. Read that book, and he made the point, which William also made in this debate. The word haos doesn't imply a change of condition. Just like Jesus said, I will be with you until the end of the age. It doesn't mean that he's not going to be with us after the end of the age. So you don't have to necessarily change condition in that use of the word until. So anyway, I'm getting it all over the place. So let's go back here and listen some more.
Earlier than that, I mean, that's very early. That's ante-Nicene era. We're talking the 100s, and this is a document that was utilized. It proliferated in the early church. So, I mean, we've got that. Then we've got St. Irenaeus. We're still in the 2nd century. And then I'm still in the 2nd century, which is earlier than your statement saying this was 3rd and 4th. When I hop on over to St. Clement of Alexandria, I'm still in the 2nd century. So we've got multiple 2nd century witnesses. And then, of course, they explode once we get to the 3rd and the 4th century, well before the claim. And I'm not saying you made the claim. I've never heard what claim you made. Well before the claim that this belief only arose because of asceticism. Clearly not. It was believed well before that.
All right. So now, is the Proto-Evangelium a book that the Roman Catholic views as, let's just say, kind of like, I wouldn't say a primary source, that would be silly, but a reliable source? So do you?
That was actually a really good question on Alton's part, because this book isn't without its flaws, I believe. And it goes into detail. The nice thing about the book is it gives us the name of Mary's parents. So that was nice. That's the source, the only source I know of that gives us the names. And so that's a good thing. It also gives us a little bit on what this author believes happened at the Nativity. And so it's a pretty good book on that kind of thing. But it goes into some details which they start discussing here that I don't totally affirm, I think are questionable. And as William mentioned, he mentioned Pope Innocent the First, and who didn't think the book was a very good book to use. And so I think there's other sources that we can use in other references. Another mention again, like Hegesippus, cousins of the Lord. Okay, so let's get on. I want to go to another timestamp here. I'm going to go over to 54. So I made a note to say something there. Let's go.
What is the word then?
Let me walk you through it one more time.
All right, so hold on. Okay, so let's go. Mark 6.
Let me walk you through it again, okay?
I'm
going to make it bigger for the audience. I'm going to make it bigger.
Right, because
okay.
Go ahead.
Let me walk you through it all.
Go ahead.
In Mark chapter 6.
Okay.
This is very important. You pay attention. It says, "Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, brother of James, Joseph, Jude, and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" They were scandalized in regard of him. Yes, here in verse 3, you've got Adelphos for brother and Adelphae for sister. The thing is, as you know very well, Alton, Adelphos and Adelphae don't always mean literal brother or sister from the same mother. You know that. Then we're told, how are they brothers and sisters? How are they related to him? Mark 6:4 continues the exact same point. Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor, but in his own country, among his own relatives." Right there, they're the relatives. They're identified as relatives. How do we know? Because it is right there parallel. Not only are they the relatives, they're in his own house, the oikia. But how are they his brothers and sisters? They're cousins. Singenusin is underlined right there for relatives, for kinsmen. That Greek word is never utilized for children from the same mother. It would have been a different Greek word utilized there. They're not children of Mary. They cannot be. That is why St. Jerome hearkened to this verse, put the flag down on it, and Helvidius had nothing in regards to this. Helvidius was wrong.
So I wanted to highlight that because I think that's actually a really good point, and I have heard that from other people, but I also have heard people interpret this in a different way. So Mark 6:4, when it says a prophet is not without honor in his own country. So he's looking at the country level of analysis. Then he goes down and says among his own kin. So before he even mentions his house, he starts talking about that level of analysis and in his own house. Then he gets down to the own house level of analysis. The way that I've read this is among his own kin would be outside of his house. You've got the country level, then you've got maybe the city level, and then you've got the house level. And so the way William's reading this is that the kin could be in the house with him. But I actually see it a different way. I see it a way, I'm forgetting, forgive me for whoever said this before, because I'm getting this from somebody else and I don't recall who. I listened to a ton of videos. But anyway, so I think that was a pretty good point. But let's listen to the response.
From what I'm reading right here, it seems like that Jesus is quoting Jeremiah 11:21.
So this is
I don't see this.
Himself.
Go ahead.
Doesn't matter what would be quoted here. He's applying this to himself, and he's applying this to his relatives. applying it to his relatives, identifying how they're his relatives.
No, brother.
They're his cousins.
No, you're misreading that.
You're incorrect.
No, you're misreading
Alton.
that.
Then show me who are the relatives then, Alton?
Right, because see this, you're trying to do a little bait and switch. I'm catching you up right now.
Let me see.
Because what you're trying to do, okay, because you're trying to make it seem like that
who are the relatives?
Hold on, brother. You're trying to say that the word relatives just means, oh, that's just cousins. But
exactly.
So blood brothers and blood sisters are not relatives. That's a different type of relative.
A different word would have been used. It wouldn't have qualified it with singular, Alton. That is why I'm demanding you show me. That's why I'm demanding you show me how they're related. They're singular. They're cousins, Alton. You're saying that I'm using a bait and switch. Who are the cousins then? Who are the kin? Who are they?
You're doing the bait and switch because you're trying to focus on the word relatives and say, no, that doesn't mean that excludes brothers and sisters.
No, Alton. Yes, it does. That Greek word singular always excludes brothers and sisters, Alton. Precisely why I'm asking you to show me that I'm wrong. You've got.
See, the thing about this debate that I'll just point out is William has a lot of knowledge. It's like, there was a definite level difference here. William is at a higher level in the quality of his arguments because obviously he's extremely well read. He knows the Greek. He's able to use, translate words and things like that. He was very good. Apparently he's got some books, and I'm probably going to have to go take a look at his books. Apparently he's, like he said, you'll only find the one reference to Jephthah's daughter. I've never even heard that argument before, so I thought that was really unique of him. So I'm going to jump ahead to another place that I think was pretty good. So here we go. We're going to go to line 76. So let's see. So I made a note to go there. Okay, let's hear what he says.
Or turtle dove for a sin offering, and she.
Okay, let me back up a little bit. So what we're talking about here is when Mary and Joseph went to the temple, as it was the custom, as it was the rule coming from the Old Testament to go to the temple and to bring a sacrifice for the son. And they brought Jesus to the temple. And you recall when they got there, they saw Simeon. Simeon said Mary's heart was going to be pierced, unfortunately. And she, from tradition, has known her whole life. She knew that Jesus would be crucified, apparently, according to tradition. I want to highlight something that I don't want to forget to say. That's super important. 2 Thessalonians 2:15. If there's one verse that could change your mind from being sola scriptura, it should be that verse. So then, brothers, stand firm and hold to the traditions that you were taught by us, either by our spoken word or by our letter. Now, that's really important. The Catholics affirm both tradition and scripture, not just scripture. And it's important that we also look into the traditions, especially because when Paul wrote to the Thessalonians and in all of the letters, we didn't have the Bible put together. The whole New Testament, the canon of the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Catholic 73 books were officially canonized in 382 at the Council of Rome. Super important to know that. A lot of Protestants think Catholics added 7 books. However, Catholics merely Protestants took away those books. They officially did it around the 19th century, but Martin Luther started off kind of scorning them. Now, to be fair, Jerome did say that the deuterocanonical books are maybe not at the same status as some of the others. And also, to be fair, there were 3 different Jewish sects, just to point something out. A lot of people say, well, the Protestants used what the Jewish people confirm. Well, it's always like the sect that won. The sect that won were the Pharisees. That's Rabbinic Judaism. And around the year 1000 AD, they affirmed the Masoretic text, which is the 66, not the 66, but the 39 books of the Old Testament. They did not include the additional 7 books, the deuterocanonical books. But that is not to be relied on completely. That goes back to Josephus, who was also a Pharisee, who talked about the last books being the Ezra, Nehemiah, and Malachi. But what that ignores is the Essenes, who were another Jewish sect, but a lot of them had vows of celibacy, and so they weren't able to generate a big group that was going to keep growing. And so, unfortunately, the Essenes are no longer mentioned after the Jewish wars in the 2nd century. The Sadducees also weren't mentioned. The Sadducees only affirmed the first 5 books of the Bible. But Jewish tradition at that time, it's really important to point this out also. What was Jesus referencing? Do we have references in the 7 books? Do we have mentions in the New Testament from the 7 books? I know I'm going off here a little bit, but I wanted to mention, I'm going to mention something that Tim Staples said. Tim Staples had this question. Your Catholic deuterocanonical books in your Old Testament cannot be canonical because they are never quoted in the New Testament. Here is what Tim Staples said, which I thought was very good. He said, to exclude these books for this reason is inconsistent. The books of Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Zephaniah, Nahum, Ezra, Nehemiah, Obadiah, and Esther are not quoted either. Yet no Protestant has a problem with including them in their canon. And while it is true there are no direct quotations of the deuterocanonical books in the New Testament, there are many allusions, and he lists some. He lists like Sirach 28:2 being alluded to in Matthew 6:14-15, Tobit 4:16 being alluded in Matthew 7:12, Wisdoms 7:26 being alluded in Hebrews 1:3, and so on. He names a bunch of. So I'm just pointing out to you that writing off those books, I don't think is a good idea. I think it's actually a pretty bad idea. Once I looked into where they came from, how they were affirmed initially, how Jerome included them in the Vulgate, and so on. Here we go.
He shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement for her.
Yes. Why is that? Is that? What is that for, though? What is that? Their purification. What is it for? It comes from Leviticus, right?
Correct.
Okay, let's look at
Leviticus. Right? I'm reading specifically Leviticus 12:6. So are you saying that Mary did none of that?
I'm saying that you have no idea what you're saying, and I'm going to show you.
Okay, so Mary didn't do any of that. So explain why Mary didn't go through this purification process.
I'm going to show you the problem with this theology, and I guarantee you after this, you're never going to use this argument again. Leviticus 12:2.
A pair of turtle doves or two young pigeons. Go ahead.
If a woman has received seed and bears a male child, she shall be unclean. It is a customary impurity that she shall be unclean. Here's the problem that you've got there, Alton. Mary doesn't fall under the strict rules of Leviticus 12:2 because Mary did not receive male seed. That was a miraculous childbirth. That was an overshadowing. This falls under the condemnation of those that have received male seed. This is a customary impurity law. What they did was they followed the Jewish law.
See, Alton is making the argument that Mary had to do these sacrifices specifically because she was with sin, she was impure. So that's where we're going from here.
Being good Jews, but she didn't fall under that condemnatory law in Leviticus 12. She never received male seed. And that is why the text includes the whole Holy Family. Being good Jews and following the law in a symbolic manner, they offer up the poor offering of 2 turtle doves, but they don't fall under the sinful or impure rule. And if they did, yet again, Alton, number 5, the 5th time, the Greek word includes Christ and maybe even St. Joseph. Christ is not a sinner. The Greek word is not about Mary alone, Alton. If you're arguing for a sinful Mary, you're arguing for a sinful Christ, and you've got a major problem on your hands there.
Okay. It clearly says, Leviticus 12:6, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. Leviticus.
If you fall under
not Leviticus, Luke 2. Yes. And 24, and to offer a sacrifice according to what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons.
My friend, once more, what they did was symbolic because they were good Jews. Look at the Greek once more.
So this wasn't a sin offering?
Absolutely not. Alton, do you realize what you're saying? You think our Lord was a sinner, Alton?
No, it's talking about Mary.
Absolutely not, Alton. It's in the plural. The Greek word there for their purification is in the plural. What on earth are you talking about, Alton? This is Bible 101, Alton. The time came for their purification, Alton. According to the law of Moses, they're following the law. They're being good Jews. They do not fall under the condemnatory rule of Leviticus 12. This is shocking to me, Alton.
Okay, so that's I actually think I agree with William. I've never actually heard this argument, so it's a unique argument on Alton's part, but I have to agree with William in the interpretation of this. And it's not just because I'm Catholic, but I think that it seems like it makes sense, and his talking about it plural, that kind of thing. It also goes with Jesus following sort of the rules and the customs and the laws. Again, going back to Jesus on the cross, giving John the care of his mother, which would have violated the kabod av viam, and also going back to when Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. It didn't mean Jesus had any impurities at all. He was just following the laws and the customs. Now, somebody might say, well, wait a second. Jesus broke the law when he cured people on Sunday, but Jesus told them how some of those 613 laws of the Jews were not to be, you have to look at it with a logical way to look at it. Would you pick your animal out of a well if they fell in the well? And so that's another thing. Jesus also was criticized by the Pharisees for picking food on the Sabbath. And the point about that was Jesus is a high priest on the order of Melchizedek. Of course, the priests were working on the Sabbath, but I digress. So anyway, that was one thing he brought up. I've got another one that's a good timestamp here. It's going to be at 1:35. Let's take a look.
And yet here we have Alton tonight.
Right. And I'll be that. And I'll be that.
You'll be an Arian heretic? Really?
Yeah. If me denying Mary as a perpetual virgin and someone who was bodily assumed into heaven, I'll be a heretic. If that's going to make me a heretic.
You'll be a modern day Helvidius then.
Right, because according to your church, I'm already destined for hell if I don't hold to that.
Now, that never once said that. I said that.
But that's what the church. That's what the church's position is. Is it not?
We can always touch upon that another day. What I am shocked.
Is it not? Yes or no? You just answer that right now.
What I am shocked at, Alton.
Can you answer that?
Yeah, it's not part of the Marian dogmas debate.
No, brother.
Alton, I told you earlier, I'm not God to judge you. So I'm going to tell you, Alton. What has me in a state of shock is if you look at the early reformers, Alton, their rallying cry was
okay. Hold on, brother.
Hold on.
This is the crux of the argument.
You can go to Pope Pius after, and I know exactly where you're going to go to. Peter and Paul condemned, whatever. We'll get to that in a bit. Mm-hmm. What has me in shock, and by the way, I touched upon that earlier, Alton. I'll touch upon it again if you want. But what has me in shock is you claim to your audience that you open up the Bible is your authority. But the very men who founded the first Reformed churches did exactly what you're doing, came to a very different conclusion, and claimed that those that denied these teachings were heretical. And yet here you have Alton, who claims to be Reformed, denying them. I can't help but think if those reformers were around today, they'd kick you out of their church. Where'd you go, Alton? You'd make your own church. So how do you know the Bible better than these men who knew the languages?
Well, we even got people before that who didn't hold to the same doctrines that the reformers did. I mean, even the Walt Disneyans in the 1100s.
It's interesting because he cites all of these heretics. That's one of the reasons I came back to the Catholic Church. I had to admit to myself, what is my bias or prejudice against Catholicism that is keeping me from aligning with the saints? You remember, saints died for what they said. I mean, look at St. Ignatius of Antioch. He was ripped apart, and he wanted to be. He was ripped apart in the Colosseum by wild animals. I mean, these saints died for what they believed in. And here I'm aligning with people who were kicked out of the church. So I thought to myself, because I used to think, these are something that men made up. They made it up about Mary being a virgin. That's all they did. They're just... this was my Protestant view. I thought the Catholic Church was just so corrupt and all this kind of stuff. I can totally understand why people have left the church. Like I left the church in the 90s. I understand that because I left the church because I was very upset with the way the Pope was handling some of the abuses in the church. And I came back to the church because I think that for the most part, I believe it's been cleaned up. But the other point is I came back to the church because Jesus said, and you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. That is a very strong reason to be in alignment with the church, the apostolic succession. St. Ignatius of Antioch pointed to the apostolic succession, pointed to worship on Sunday, pointed to the Eucharist as transubstantiation, pointed to the fact that all kinds of things that he pointed to the Mass as a sacrifice. If you follow the early church fathers, you don't really have a choice, in all honesty, but to return to the mother, the Church of Rome. And a lot of people, unfortunately, a lot of people in Protestant faiths really do not like the Catholic Church. And I think it's because of the Marian apparitions, especially because they've become more and more prevalent in the past handful of centuries. I think it's the Marian apparitions that have driven some Protestants away from Mother Mary, because as William pointed out, the very first reformers in the 16th century, so William Luther posted his stuff around 1517, and other Calvin, Zwingli, they were all around that time. They affirmed Mary's perpetual virginity. But because in Marian apparitions, she's appearing to Catholics and Orthodox too, she's appearing to people like that, and she's in these apparitions, she does appear sometimes outside of the Catholic faith. Like I saw a Jewish professor that she appeared to him. Apparently he was a Harvard professor. But a lot of the messages coming from Fatima, Lourdes, Our Lady of Saluva, where she basically went to, you know, she was actually in Saluva in Lithuania. She appeared to these people, including a Protestant pastor, a Calvinist pastor. She appeared to them and she was crying, and she was basically saying that the Calvinists had overrun what was her son's church, the Catholic Church. Now they've got a tremendous Catholic church built there on that stance. The Calvinist pastor at that time became a Catholic after this all occurred. There's a bunch of miracles associated with it. I won't get into that so much. Mary also appeared right after the Protestant Reformation started in 1517. She appeared in 1531 to Juan Diego over in Guadalupe. And again, because of the Protestant spread throughout Europe, she started spreading her message over in the New World. And within 10 years, about 9 million Aztecs were worshiping Christianity through Catholicism. And so Mother Mary has been appearing all over the world. There's many affirmed appearances. They've been accompanied by miracles. If you are a Protestant and you haven't looked into those, please do yourself a favor, because they are amazing, especially at Lourdes, the miracles of Lourdes. So let's see what Big Stack says. I watched this debate but left because of the mind-numbing lack of basic respect for the other Christians in the chat. I realize that this is one of the most contentious issues, but yeah, Read the Gospel says, God bless. Dan Van Cohenberg says, Protestantism. Hey there, guys. So it's great to see you guys in the chat from Big Stack and the rest of you. Ersh Man came a little while ago, and Richard says, God bless, and Read the Gospels, God bless. And yeah, I did see some hostility in the chat, I have to admit. We have to remember 1 Peter 3:15. We're supposed to present why we believe in a very gentle manner. And that's why I was trying to look at this debate from the lens of the Protestant, because I was a Protestant for, kind of starting around 2002 when I was engaged to my husband, who was a Lutheran, still a Lutheran. I haven't been able to talk him out of that, and I probably will never be able to talk him out of that. So I try to speak to Protestants as with the knowledge that I'm married to one. So, and to be as fair as I can to the Protestant faith. But I do say that I think one of the reasons why people have rejected some of the Marian dogmas that were affirmed by the Reformed early starters is because Mary's appearances. And I think that that's something that we're not required to believe as Catholics, the Marian apparitions. However, boy, they put some frosting on that cupcake. I mean, that is so beautiful. It's incredible. And so I think you definitely want to take a look at that. If you haven't looked at the miracle of the sun at Fatima in 1917, coincidentally, 1917, Miracle of the Sun, October 13th, 1917, was 500 years, almost to the day of when Martin Luther started spreading his 95 Theses. It's really interesting. So 1917, we had this Miracle of the Sun, and you have to look into it. So I really want to thank all of you for coming in here. Let me play a little bit more of this debate, though, because I think that the thing about William and Alton that I said before, but I'll say again in case you didn't hear, it was very polite conversation between these two. Nobody raised their voices. The chat was a bit harsh. Unfortunately, I think there was some hammering going on. People were kind of denigrating Alton and things like that. And I, as a person who was in the Baptist faith for over 10 years, I think it's try to be fair and because these are our brothers and sisters in Christ. We all, as I heard Blue Collar Catholic, I was listening to this channel. I like what this guy said. He said the Catholics are taking, like, since we have the fullness of the church, we're kind of like taking the Cadillac or the limousine to heaven, and the Protestant church is kind of like just taking a little jalopy to heaven. I thought that's a funny way to put it, but that's just something that I thought was interesting. I always use the banquet idea where the Catholics have like this banquet, all the angels and the saints, the communion of saints and the apostolic succession. And then the Protestants came and grabbed the turkey from the banquet, which is the Bible, and kind of ran with it. And so it's just an interesting thing. So let's hear.
The Waldensians held to the perpetual virginity of Mary. Waldo held to it. So that's, you're in trouble there as well. His confession of faith, really? Hold on, his confession of faith calls Mary ever virgin. Alton, you're in my world right now, brother. I know the perpetual virginity. I know the reformers there, brother. I'm writing a book on it. I've been doing this for years, my friend. What is stunning me is I need an answer. What do you see in the Bible that the Waldensians didn't see, Luther didn't see, Calvin didn't see, Zwingli didn't see, Francis Turretin didn't see, but Alton Johnson sees it? What is it?
Okay. Did the Waldensians believe that Mary was the mediator and that she was bodily assumed?
We're not talking about co-mediatrix. Right now, I'm
Right.
asking you.
Okay, but bodily assumed.
You can ask me that afterwards. Right now, I'm asking you to answer my question for me, and then you can get to the Waldensians and the bodily assumption.
I've already answered.
There were actually, I'm now remembering what was going on in the chat. There were some conversations. Some people kept labeling Alton as very proud. But it is a question about pride, showing pride a little bit. When you think that you can plant your own church and you can start your own belief system, and you're not really in alignment, you're not following, you haven't been appointed, you haven't been passed down, you're not within a succession of other people, you're not approved, you're just kind of creating your own belief system. That is the fear of Protestantism. And it's one of the reasons also why I came back to the Catholic Church, is because I realized we do need a centralized authority. I mean, we should have a hierarchy. Jesus talked about a hierarchy. He's got the Jesus, then the father, then the mother, then the children, hierarchy in the family, hierarchy in the church with the senior pastor. Then right before Jesus, we've got a male pastor because Jesus was a male, then the female comes after that. So there's a lot of hierarchy that Jesus approved. And we've got the hierarchy, obviously, of the apostolic succession. And so it's something that I think Protestants really should consider, because, I've heard a lot of atheists say, hey, until Christians get their act together, and some people think we had 40,000. I don't think we have 40,000 different denominations of Christianity, but it's possible because we have a lot of people going out there with their non-denominational churches, planting their own little church and with their own belief systems. And that's the big challenge with Protestantism. You don't have a unified understanding of anything. So Protestants vary on whether they believe in purgatory. They vary on whether they believe in once saved, always saved. They vary in Mary. I mean, there's just so many things they vary in that I think it's kind of a dangerous thing. And, it's a real challenge. So I want to say thanks to everybody who's come in here today. I hope you like and subscribe and do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Thank you.